All right, everybody, so welcome back to another episode of Colton Posey Fishing. Today we're going to be talking about my best December baits, what baits that I like to use in December. Now, we're kind of going to tie all this together with the finesse baits, and we're going to tie it in with the casting baits, or your more typical pyre fishing baits. But this is really going to revolve around the water temperatures dropping. The water temperature is getting colder, the air temperature is getting colder, and you know, you can use a lot of the same baits that you have been using, but there's a few key details that you really need to understand before you start going out there and just absolutely trying to demolish fish in the month of December. One of the cool things is when you go, you're typically going to be probably about the only boat out there, so it's a very, very fun time, in my opinion, to kind of have the lake to yourself and explore new waters. So stay tuned, this is something you don't want to miss. Now, one of the first baits I want to talk about, we're going to talk about the finesse baits first. So if you're not interested in the finesse baits, you know, just kind of fast forward probably about the 3-minute mark and we'll be done with it. But the first one I want to talk about is going to be that Damiki Vault. Okay, so this is a little bitty blade bait, but one of the cool things about, you know, throwing blade baits during the winter, a lot of you people who, like me, that fish blueback herring lakes and stuff, you'll notice a lot of these fish get in ditches and stuff. And they also do it out of when you're not fishing blueback herring lakes, but typically it's not as notorious as a blueback herring lake. One of the cool things about the Damiki Vault or any kind of blade bait you choose to throw is you can get this bait down to them super quick, and then you can use that Damiki to bust up the bait balls. Okay, so when you're busting up these bait balls and stuff, it typically gets the fish that are feeding on, you know, these bait balls active. They get to feeding very actively, and if you've got something down there vibrating, creating some kind of vibration in the water, some kind of disturbance in the water, typically they're going to target that. Now, depending on where you're fishing, it can get kind of unpredictable whether you're going to catch the big fish out of the school or you're going to catch the little fish out of the school. You kind of have to cross your fingers and bat your toes and hope that the big one bites it first. Now, the second one I'm going to talk about is going to be that tail spinner, okay? But this is the Jackal tail spinner. I really like that Jackal tail spinner, especially when these fish, like if y'all watched last year, that video, it was an amazing day on the water in the middle of December or January. Either way, it was very cold. I caught like 60 or 70 fish just ripping them. Okay, the tail spinner is going to be perfect when these fish start to school up, and you're going to start noticing here in the next week or so, it may already be happening depending on where you live, but you're going to notice these fish starting to really school up, run these bluff walls, run these channel swings and stuff like that. They're just going to be cruising. A lot of them be out on points and stuff like that, and you can use this bait right here and just slow roll it, you know, over the top of their heads, and it's a great way to just catch a ton of fish. Now, the other one's going to be kind of that OG, okay? It's going to be the OG Swimbait. I like going with a 3/8 ounce head all-terrain Smalley Smasher if you can still buy them. I'm not even sure if they're still available. I bought a ton of them a while back. But you know, throwing that 3/8 ounce swim bait, and I like throwing either a 2.75 inch Rage Swimmer or a 3-inch 6 cents Divine. I'm more of the Rage Swimmer type person, simply because when those water temperatures drop below 60 degrees, those ribs that are pointed forward help slow that bait down a little more, and you still get that tail kick action, and it just seems to get a lot more bites for me. Now, you may use a different brand, and you know, it may work for you. Use whatever you prefer. As always, not a sponsored segment. Any of the baits that I talk about, it's just stuff I purely use. All right, so one of the first ones we're going to talk about when it comes to pyre baits is if you're fishing something like a river system that's got a lot of cover on it. A lot of times this time of year, these fish like to move up in isolated pieces of cover. And one of those isolated pieces of cover that seems to be a lot more productive than most of the other ones is going to be laydown. So any type of treetops or anything like that that's in your water, but you've got to have something to get down in there, and then you've got to have something to get the fish out. So running your normal flipping setup, you know, I like 50-pound braid, but this time of year, you know, there's no leaves necessarily on the trees. There's not a whole lot of thick vegetation. Everything's dying off. So I'm going to go to a smaller weight. I'm going to 3/4 ounce, okay? And I've got it pegged up here at the top so the weight can't slide up and down. And then I'm going with that 3/0 Trocar flipping hook, and then I'm going with the Reactions Innovation Sweet Beaver. Now, here's the biggest key about the Sweet Beaver this time of year. If y'all watch my other baits videos and you heard me talking about the Sweet Beaver earlier this year, I break these legs apart. This time of year, I leave it together. It gives this bait a more subtle action. It's kind of like why you would run a twin-tail grub this time of year instead of like a crawl style bait. You want something a little more subtle, more water displacement, things like that, and you'll get a ton more bites. Now this is one that I'm really going to be throwing from now all the way until like, you know, mid-March probably. It just kind of depends on the weather and the water temp, but you know, as long as those water temps are below 65 degrees, I'm gonna always have this bait on my front deck, and that's gonna be a swim bait, okay? I like going with a 3.75 inch rage swimmer, but I like throwing the 1/4 ounce head actually on my bigger swim baits instead of the 3/8 ounce head. And the reason for that is when I cast this bait out there, I make a long cast, it does take it longer to fall and hit bottom. And that's what I'm gonna be doing a lot on these points and stuff like that. I'm gonna throw this bait, let it sink all the way to the bottom, and then I'm gonna slow roll it and kind of just tick it over the top of stuff. And typically you're going to get tons of bites doing this. The swim bait is one of the most absolute perfect ways to cover a lot of water. It's very subtle, and typically you get those bigger bites. If you're on a spotted bass fishery, or you know, a largemouth fishery that has, you know, like gizzard shad and stuff like that in it, this bait right here will absolutely slay them. So make sure to pick up some of these. Now the next one that I want to talk about is crankbaits. Now there's several different crankbaits you can go with, but there's kind of like this system that I really keep in the back of my mind when I'm choosing a crankbait each time I go. Anytime that water temperature drops below 65 degrees, I typically want a flat-sided crankbait. Now there is exceptions. So a lot of you know about like the wiggle wart, the rock crawler, and all that stuff. The Rapala DT series. All these crankbaits that are very, very known for winter, and they have their own time and place. I really, really like the round bill flat-sided crankbaits when those fish are pushed out and they're in that, you know, 6 to 8 foot range, okay? That's gonna keep that bait kind of right above their heads or in that strike zone even longer every time you reel it, and you're naturally gonna get more bites. Now where the square bill, when I want to keep that flat-sided square bill tied on, is when these fish start pushing up to cover up against docks and stuff like that. You'll notice this time of year, these fish, is kind of like you go from just catching them left and right, they're schooled up, and then they're spread out, and they can be difficult to catch, or you're getting about here, getting about here, getting about here. They're kind of spread out everywhere. When that happens, I treat it just like I do the post spawn, except in reverse. So instead of starting to speed up during the post spawn, as the post spawn continues, I'll start slowing down a little bit at a time, and you'll be able to pick off a lot more fish. Now, if these fish are getting on deep bluff walls and they're suspended in that 10 to 12 foot range, that, you know, your Norman little end crankbaits and your rock crawlers and your wiggle warts and stuff like that, they're going to become very, very productive to catch those fish in that range. So, you know, pick your crankbait based on necessarily the action. You either want that real tight action, or you kind of want that loose wobble. What I mean by that is, instead of that bait like hunting real hard all over the place, I want kind of that straight, streamlined, but just kind of like wobble, loose, lazy type action. And you're naturally going to catch a lot more fish, just like if you throw you know, a rattle trap across flats and stuff like that, and you keep it right above these fish's heads and stuff. You're just naturally going to get a lot more bites because you're staying in that strike zone. Now this one is a fun one, and you may not think that you will catch a ton of fish in the colder water temps with this bait, but it's just one of those that it's a freak of nature. Sometimes it just, days when it ain't supposed to work, it just works, and you just catch a lot of fish, and it's a fun way to catch fish, even if it's grindy and you know, can be tiresome and boring or whatever at times. But that's going to be a buzzbait, okay? And once again, if you watch my buzzbait video, stained water, I like going with something loud, something obnoxious. Clear, clean water, not necessarily like super clear water where I can see like 30 foot down, but like cleaner water, it may have a slight stain to it. Then I like going with something a little bit more quieter, like the War Eagle buzzbait or something like that. But I'm typically going to keep like minnow style baits on my buzzbait this time of year, because a lot of times you'll really notice as we get further into winter and stuff, a lot of shad, especially if you're not getting those plummeting temps where it's like down in the 20s or teens or anything like that at night, a lot of these shad, especially early in the morning and throughout the very, very first part of the morning, if there's a lot of cloud cover, they'll stay really, really close to the surface, so a couple feet, and you'll absolutely destroy them on a buzzbait. And it's a good way to get a lot of fish who may not be active that day to commit 100% to your bait. Now this is going to be the last one. Now I I do want to say these are all power baits because this time of year I'm cold and I want to keep moving. This does not mean that you cannot slow down and catch them on a Texas rig worm or a jig or anything like that. Use whatever you feel comfortable with, but if you want to keep moving, then this video is 100% for you. But the next one's gonna be a chatterbait. So it really depends. A lot of people like throwing a jackhammer and stuff this time of year. Me personally, I just catch a lot more on something like the Elite Evo. I've been using this Elite Evo for a while now, and I really have come to enjoy it. And then like the Strutter blade from Brazalo, those are all good chatterbaits, but I typically want more of that streamline action, okay? What this does is it makes it easier when I'm doing a pause or anything like that. It's easier when I go to start cranking again to get that chatterbait active and vibrating again. So with the jackhammer, you'll notice it kind of darts off here, there, and everywhere, and a lot of times when it flips or burns out, it's kind of aggravating to get it to start, and you kind of have to rip it or something like that to get that chatterbait active again. With these, you don't necessarily have to do that. Now, sometimes, very few times, you want that erratic action throughout the winter. I've only had it in a few scenarios, and I don't necessarily know why they were eating it that day, but at times, it can be very productive. But 99% of the time, I'm gonna go with a streamline style chatterbait. So guys, those are my top baits for December, and you probably think, okay, well, some of them look really good and some of them may not work. I challenge you to go out and try them, spend time with them, be confident in every cast, and I guarantee you'll catch more fish. Either way, guys, I appreciate it. I'll see you next time.